Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 13 hidden gems for the 2023 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about players at a variety of different positions, players that you would consider to be sleeper options going into Week 13, despite, of course, 6 teams being on bye, but I like to call them hidden gems. These are players that currently have very low start percentages across leagues, some as low as 4%, 9%, some in the 50% range, like the thumbnail of today's video, Amari Cooper. I want to talk about players that going into this week have a huge opportunity to lend an assist to our team to lead us to victory in order to get us one step closer to the fantasy football playoffs and, of course, helping us capture a 2023 fantasy football championship. So before I get into talking about each individual player, sharing with you guys statistics and my opinions as to why I believe they'll have great performances going into Week 13, I want to remind you guys, if you guys want timestamps, they're down in the description of the video. While you're down there, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We are very close to achieving our goal of 82,000 subscribers. I greatly appreciate all the support you guys continue to send in my direction. 82, what is that, Jason Witten's number? If there's any other 82s you guys can think of, let me know down in the comment section, but I greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much. Also, at the end of today's video, I'll be putting together a couple pick'em slips for this upcoming weekend's games. In regards to the suggestions I made last night, in regards to Geno Smith, CeeDee Lamb, that went ahead and hit. I mean, honestly, any single higher play that you would have made last night was going to hit. It was a very entertaining game last night. Even our Monday pick'em slip hit. So we'll go ahead and give you more suggestions in regards to pick'em slips going into this upcoming weekend at the end of today's video. For those of you guys who want to go ahead and trail, be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. There's a link down in the description. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to get the first-time deposit match up to $100, you'll get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning. These rankings are by position, by tier, flex rankings, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings for the remainder of the season every single Sunday morning. And I know that there's a couple Saturday games upcoming in Week 15 and 16. I think there's 3 Saturday games in Week 15, and I believe 2 Saturday games in Week 16. So I'll be sure to go ahead and send those out on Saturday mornings throughout those weeks. So go ahead and take advantage of the opportunity on hand of getting my rankings. Be sure to check the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your location, and take advantage of course, being a new customer and the 0.5 total yard special of Patrick Mahomes going into this week against the Green Bay Packers Sunday Night Football. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's talk about some hidden gems going into Week 13, beginning with the first player I wanted to mention, Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson going into this week is the Soul Stone. The Soul Stone, like we all know, requires a sacrifice. And going into this week, the sacrifice is in the form of Rashid Shaheed or potentially Chris Olave. There have been a lot of injuries that have taken place to the New Orleans Saints receiving core. Of course, we all know that Michael Thomas was placed on the injury reserve just a couple weeks back, but now that we have Rashid Shaheed, who has already been determined out, Chris Olave, despite limited practice all week long, is still in the concussion protocol. They'll once again test him tomorrow with an independent doctor to determine whether he will be eligible to play. If in fact Chris Olave is active, I still believe that Juwan Johnson is a huge force within this offense and could potentially lead to a lot of fantasy success at a tight end position, which again doesn't have much depth. So for those of us who are looking to fill in for a Dalton Kincaid or of course Mark Andrews that you lost a couple weeks back, hopefully Juwan Johnson can deliver that this week in the Bipocalypse. This is a player that is currently being started in only 9% of leagues on Yahoo Fantasy. He's played 75% of the snaps or more in each of the last 3 games that he has played. He is a huge part of this offense, and he also saw himself a huge uptick of overall targets last week, obviously because of the absence of Rashid Shaheed and of course Chris Olave in the second half of that contest. Now when we're talking about his overall target count, he's going to be competing against guys like Lynn Bowden, A.T. Perry, Keith Kirkwood, I guess Taysom Hill if he wants to catch a couple passes here and there. But outside of those guys, really the only competition that Juwan Johnson has for being the number 2 receiving option within this offense, assuming Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed are potentially out, is Alvin Kamara. So if we assume Alvin Kamara is going to get 10 to 15 targets within this game, which honestly isn't a crazy number overall to assume, then of course Juwan Johnson, next man up within this overall situation, should be a fantastic play. When we look at Juwan Johnson's numbers over the course of the last 2 seasons, 2022 and 2023 with the New Orleans Saints, in games in which he has been targeted 5 or more times, he's averaging 10.04 half PPR fantasy points per game. In the 10 games in which he has had 5+ targets, where he's averaging of course 10 fantasy points per game, he has scored 6 touchdowns in those 10 games. There is a lot of potential for upside, especially down in the red zone. I know that this offense down in the red zone, there have been many of woes. I'm assuming that, of course, there's a potential that Juwan Johnson not only can find the end zone this week, but be a huge contributor at the tight end position for this offense. Moving on to the reality stone, I want to talk about today's thumbnail, Amari Cooper. The reality of the situation is that, yes, Amari Cooper currently has a 53% start percentage, but I truly believe that number is far too low when we consider the reality of the situation. With Dorian Thompson-Robinson not being able to clear the concussion protocol earlier today, Joe Flacco has been named the starting quarterback. The last time we saw him as a starting quarterback in the National Football League last season with the New York Jets, of course, Zach Wilson had a preseason injury. The first 3 weeks of the season, Joe Flacco was the starting quarterback of the organization. Throughout those 3 weeks, he targeted his wide receivers 81 times, so that means 55% of his overall passing attempts from weeks 1 through 3 of the 2022 season went towards his wide receivers. Garrett Wilson, his number one wide receiver throughout that span of time, weeks 1 through 3, as a rookie in his first 3 games of his entire career, had 33 targets and 22.3% of the overall target share. When we take into account that the Cleveland Browns are taking on the Los Angeles Rams indoors in LA, and when we consider the Rams are the 12th best matchup at the wide receiver position, allowing 27.21 fantasy points per game and a half PPR to opposing wide receivers since week 5. When we take that all into consideration, there's a huge uptick for potential in regards to Amari Cooper in comparison to if in fact DTR was to start this week. When we look at the last 3 games in which DTR has started for the Cleveland Browns this season, week 4, 11, and 12. In those games, Amari Cooper is averaging 3.37 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. In the 8 games without DTR, whether it's been with PJ Walker or Deshaun Watson, he's averaging 12.74 half PPR fantasy points per game. In 6 of those 8 games with Watson and Walker, he's been able to surpass 89 receiving yards. Again, a lot of success when you go ahead and give him a competent quarterback that is not a rookie, that is not struggling, and obviously in the form of Joe Flacco, a veteran presence. We already heard earlier today from the mouth of Amari Cooper was quoted to have said that Joe Flacco's dropbacks at practice are poetry in motion. That kind of a comment really does give me a lot of confidence, and especially with this offense potentially taking another step forward, considering their quarterback play is a veteran. He's going to be able to check it down and move the chains and allow this offense to flourish where they haven't over the course of the last 2 weeks. I expect Amari Cooper, in the reality of the situation, to be a fantastic play. Moving on to the Power Stone, I wanted to mention another Cleveland Brown. Again, not only does Joe Flacco impact the passing game in terms of these receivers within this team, Elijah Moore, David Njoku, Amari Cooper, but he also impacts the running game. Now, I wanted to mention Jerome Ford, not because Kareem Hunt is dealing with a groin injury. Earlier today, he was deemed to be cleared. He's off the injury report, should be good to go. But the reason why I trust Jerome Ford going into this week, despite the fact that Kareem Hunt is going to be active and, of course, is going to dominate majority of the goal line opportunities. Again, if we go ahead and look at this entire season, Kareem Hunt has 7 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line for 5 rushing touchdowns, in comparison to Ford, who only has 3 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line for 2 rushing touchdowns. Again, a pretty big sway in the direction of Kareem Hunt in terms of the confidence that Kevin Stefanski, their head coach and primary play caller, has for him. But nonetheless, I wanted to mention the potential in which Jerome Ford has on the ground and, of course, through the air with Joe Flacco being the starting quarterback of this team. In the 3 games in which, of course, Jerome Ford has played with DTR as a starting quarterback, weeks 4, 11, and 12, he's only averaging 9.27 fantasy points per game and only getting himself about 10 rushing attempts per game on average, in comparison to the 8 games in which he has played with Deshaun Watson or PJ Walker, averaging 13.31 fantasy points per game, and in 5 of those 8 games able to surpass 75 total yards. Again, on top of that, when we talk about Joe Flacco and his kind of impact within this offense, over the course of the first 3 games of the 2022 season, as a starting quarterback of the New York Jets, throughout those 3 games, he was targeting his running backs a ridiculous amount of times. Throughout those 3 games, 40 targets, 27 receptions, 179 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown, 27% of his overall passing attempts in the direction of his running backs. A check down king. Again, if you guys remember back in the day, Danny Woodhead was an incredible fantasy option, a top 12 player in many circumstances because of Joe Flacco back with Baltimore. It hasn't stopped. Joe Flacco continues to check it down. Lack of mobility obviously is the main factor of that. And you'll continue to look in the direction of Jerome Ford within that overall circumstance. Primarily because if you just look at the last couple weeks that we have seen Jerome Ford play with DTR, he's been able to get himself 12 targets, 6 receptions. Again, as long as we continue to give Jerome Ford, who is the primary receiving back of this offense, more opportunity in that circumstance, and with the potential of these wide receivers within this offense being able to actually find success, it's only going to open up more potential for the running game. And with that, Jerome Ford between the tackles, of course, behind this elite offensive line, should find himself a lot of success. When we talk about the Los Angeles Rams, their run-stopping defense specifically, they've allowed 11.37 fantasy points per game in terms of running back rushing statistics isolated since week 5. That's a 4.19 yard per carry average since week 5 to opposing running backs. I think there's a lot of success to be had here with Jerome Ford as our power stone this week. Moving on to the space stone, we have Greg Dortch, a player that we've mentioned for 3 consecutive weeks now as a fantastic option for fantasy purposes. Now, when we talk about Greg Dortch, the primary reason why we have so much confidence in him is because of the absence of Michael Wilson. For another consecutive week, Michael Wilson is out. Of course, they wanted to go ahead and make sure he's healthy going into the bye week in week 14. But Greg Dortch, currently only being started in 4% of leagues, has an opportunity with Michael Wilson already being deemed out this week and Hollywood Brown not practicing a single time this week, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. 3 did not participate overall designations. There's a potential in which the top 2 receiving options of this offense could be out. And if that's going to take place, of course, Greg Dortch, a fantastic option. In the last 2 games, Greg Dortch has played 75 and 76% of the offensive snaps. He's been able to garner a 22.7% target share, 17 targets on 75 total passing attempts. He's been able to garner a 24.3% target rate, 17 targets on 70 total routes ran. He's been able to accumulate 10.6 and 10.2 half PPR fantasy points in the last 2 games and has the privilege of taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, who are allowing 24.34 fantasy points per game since week 5. They've allowed the 14th most receiving yards to opposing wide receivers throughout that span of time. Again, a middle of the pack matchup, but one that you can absolutely take advantage of, especially considering, Trey McBride, he's dealing with his own set of injuries. He's still going to be active. He's still going to be a great option. But Rondale Moore in the last 2 games only has 4 targets. There is a huge advantage for Greg Dortch, and this goes back to 2022. We look at the beginning of the season, weeks 1 through 3 of 2022. We've done that on 2 different occasions now with Kyler Murray, Greg Dortch, and of course Joe Flacco with the New York Jets and all that entire scenario. But when we talk about last season, weeks 1 through 3, throughout that span of time, we saw Greg Dortch garner 23 targets throughout those first 3 games. In those 3 games, put up 9.8, 13.5 and 12.5 fantasy points. He is a solid 10-point player. That is my anticipation. And if in fact this offense wants to step up in comparison to where they were last week, find themselves far more production prior to the garbage time in the 4th quarter, Greg Dortch can be an even better play this week as this week's Space Stone. Moving on to the Time Stone, I wanted to mention the Atlanta Falcons defense because it's only a matter of time until this defense this week locks in and puts up a great performance, but they also have potential in the future, and I'll mention that in just a moment. Now, the primary reason they are implicated as a potential play this week is because they take on the New York Jets. The New York Jets offense versus fantasy defenses has been one of the best matchups all season, but over the course of the last 5 weeks, it has been extremely advantageous. Defenses have scored 21, 8, 27, and 12 fantasy points in the last 5 games against the Jets offense. And my expectation going into this week, especially considering the Jets offensive line has struggled as of late, the running game has not been relevant, there's a lot of potential for upside there within the matchup, especially considering the Falcons are coming off a week in which they put up 12 fantasy points as a defense against the New Orleans Saints offense, in which they really did not allow them to score anything but field goals within that game. Now, the other reason that I wanted to mention time in regards to the Atlanta Falcons defense is because in week 15, the first week of the fantasy football playoffs, they take on the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers defense took on the Atlanta Falcons in week 1. The Falcons in that week put up 12 fantasy points. Again, another great week there. But as of late, defenses against the Carolina Panthers offense, 10, 21, 7, 26, and 7. There's a lot of potential there as a streaming option for the first week of the fantasy playoffs. Many of you may have like a team like the Dallas Cowboys defense that did not play well last night and have upcoming matchups going forward that may not be as advantageous as we'd want them to be. This could be a solid streaming option for not only this week, but for the future. Moving on to the final player I wanted to mention, it is Kenny Pickett. I know many of you guys were surprised to have seen Kenny Pickett in my top 16 quarterback rankings in yesterday's video, but I truly do believe, based on the matchup and the fact that Matt Canada is no longer looming within this organization, Kenny Pickett truly is a better play. He's really been held back with Matt Canada's offense over the course of the season, and he'll once again prove that this week taking on the Arizona Cardinals. Just looking at stats from last week, the Pittsburgh Steelers had their first game of 400 total yards as an offense in 59 total games. That entire streak, of course, accumulated under Matt Canada's offensive coordinator rule, but going forward, we have a lot of potential here. Of course, Kenny Pickett last week, 278 passing yards. That's the second highest passing yardage total he's been able to have in his career. He had a 72.73% passing completion percentage. And if it wasn't for the fact that Deontay Johnson bobbled that touchdown, we have ourselves an even bigger week last week. The Arizona Cardinals, as a defense this season, on a per week basis over the course of weeks 1 through 12 have allowed 360 total yards per game to opposing offenses. Of course, as of late, not only have they not been able to stop the run, which of course the Pittsburgh Steelers very much so are a run-first attack. It's only going to open up play action, but they've also given up their fair share of points to opposing quarterbacks. Since week 5, they've allowed 15.5 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's the 8th best matchup at the position. If we look at the full total season, amongst all teams in the National Football League, the Arizona Cardinals have allowed the second highest passing touchdown percentage rate. There is a lot of potential here for Kenny Pickett going into this week to have himself another great performance against the defense that, of course, just got a lot of points dropped on them by the Los Angeles Rams. I'm expecting a lot of success here from Kenny Pickett at home going into this week. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my Week 13 hidden gems. Now that we've covered all that, let's go ahead and let's transition to talking about some pick'em slips going into Week 13 via Underdog Fantasy. Again, be sure to check out the link down in the description. Use code Andrew. Make that first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only to get the first-time deposit match. Again, if you deposit 10, you'll get 10. You deposit 100, you get 100. But you'll also get my rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. So let's go ahead and check that out right now. So besides Thursday play of CeeDee Lamb and Geno Smith hitting like we mentioned earlier, and we went ahead and showed that graphic, we also had Monday's play of DJ Moore and Tyrese Halliburton. I got the Cyber Monday kind of deal play, so I was able to take advantage of that, but I also did let you guys know to keep an eye out for that. Either way, DJ Moore in many of circumstances hit for me this weekend, but let's go ahead and let's share with you guys some of the plays that we shared last week in terms of our Friday live stream and our Saturday live stream and even our Sunday morning. So in terms of some of the plays that we went ahead and put together, we had, Michael Pittman Jr., Tank Dell, DJ Moore. Obviously, 2 of these 3 hit, but it was a $25 play. Was able to get, of course, 2 of the 3 to hit, and we got our money pretty much 3x in that overall circumstance. Tank Dell just needed one more target, but hey, no big deal there. We scrolled down. Tank Dell, in terms of receptions, was able to get the job done in regards to all these other players. That was another great play in that circumstance. Unfortunately, this is one of the plays I think we put together on a Saturday afternoon. I literally needed one more reception for Stephon Diggs, and I think twice in the overtime period, he dropped the pass. It's not a big deal. It happens. We scroll down. Another one of these big plays that we went ahead and put together in regards to, Kyren Williams, David Njoku, Trey McBride having themselves a fantastic week. We even had our Black Friday overall experience in which I'll let y'all know, hey, listen, if these are available, go ahead and put them together. Again, a lot of success was found as of late. Let's go ahead and continue that momentum going into this week, shall we? So going into this week, there are 5 plays that I absolutely love, and it begins with David Montgomery. So let's go ahead and let's scroll down. Again, there's a lot of plays that you could potentially make going into this week, but I love David Montgomery, and I love the potential of him going higher than 0.5 total rushing or receiving touchdowns. And the primary reason I love it is because, again, they take on the New Orleans Saints. It's a very advantageous matchup in that circumstance. Thus far this season, David Montgomery has scored a rushing touchdown in every single healthy game he has participated in. The reason why I stated as such is because early in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, he left. I think he played like a handful of snaps, left the game due to an injury, didn't return. So every game he has been healthy and has participated in, has played at least 50% of the offensive snaps, he has scored a touchdown this season. I'm expecting him to continue that momentum of 1 touchdown minimum. Now, the next player I wanted to talk about is Sam Howell. Now, I've mentioned it all week long. Sam Howell, over the course of this entire season, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he leads the National Football League in terms of total passing yards. Nonetheless, his current number, if you go ahead and drop this, more picks down, 38.5 passing attempts is an absolute steal. I mentioned it all week long, whether it is in regards to guys like, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, Logan Thomas. This is going to be a game in which they're losing. And when they're losing to the Miami Dolphins, they will absolutely have to throw the ball more than 38.5 times. I don't know why this number is here, but it's going to change. Just hope that you're able to put this together within a pick'em slip before it disappears, because I can guarantee you it probably will sooner rather than later. In 8 of the last 9 games, he has gone higher than this number. In 6 of the last 6 games, he has gone higher on this number. 42 plus passing attempts, 6 of the last 6 games. There is an absolute guarantee that he'll be able to throw the ball at a high volume, because that's pretty much what this team does. They have the highest passing rate amongst all teams in the National Football League thus far this season. This is an automatic play, probably my favorite of the week. All right, scrolling down, we have another play that we like in regards to Michael Pittman Jr., who we, of course, took advantage of last week in regards to having himself a lot of potential with 6.0 receptions. I really like him at 6.5. Like, honestly, this is a great number. When we talk about Michael Pittman Jr., when he has had Gardner Minshew as a starting quarterback this season, in 6 of the last 7 games in which they've played together as Minshew as a starter, he's been able to surpass 8 or more receptions. 6 of the last 7 games. This is an automatic in my mind. He only needs 7 receptions. He's been able to get 8 on a consistent basis. I know he takes on the Tennessee Titans. This should be an advantageous matchup for the receiving core of this offense. I honestly do think that if Josh Downs was in this conversation, I understand that he's not as of right now. Oh, he is. They just don't even have his picture. 4.5 receptions. I think that's very capable for him to achieve as well. But as of right now, Michael Pittman Jr., 6.5, a very achievable number in this circumstance. Okay, moving on. The next player that I wanted to mention is Najee Harris. Now, again, like I mentioned in regards to Kenny Pickett, I expect the Pittsburgh Steelers offense to find themselves a lot of success, but specifically 55.5 rushing yards is a really low number, especially considering he is technically still the starting running back of this offense and will probably give himself more rushing attempts than Jaylen Warren. When we take into account the fact that the Arizona Cardinals run-stop defense is putrid. I mean, when I'm talking about terrible, let me just go ahead and just mention a couple running back rushing yard numbers over the course of the season. It's a very long list. Get ready. Kyron Williams, 143. Royce Freeman, 77. Singletary, 112. Bijan Robinson, 95. Gus Edwards, 80. Kenneth Walker, 105. Kyron Williams, again, 158. Joe Mixon, 81. Christian McCaffrey, 106. Tony Pollard, 122. Saquon Barkley, in a game in which they passed only in the second half, 63 rushing yards. Brian Robinson Jr. in week 1, 59 rushing yards. Every single running back that has taken on this defense has ran for over 55 rushing yards against them. I understand that, of course, Najee Harris has to compete with Jaylen Warren, but my anticipation is that he'll be able to accumulate this yardage very quickly as they take this lead and, of course, run the ball down, the throat of the most advantageous matchup at the running back position. Najee Harris going higher on this number in automatic. I mean, when we just look at the last, couple games that Najee Harris has played, he's been able to surpass this number in 3 of the last 4 games he's played. And in those games, those 3 of the last 4, he's also accompanied those performances with rushing touchdowns. Najee Harris has played a lot better as of late than people kind of give him credit for, and I truly do believe there's a potential in which Najee Harris very easily surpasses this number going into this week. All right, the final player I wanted to mention is one of our hidden gems in regards to today's episode. It is Jerome Ford being able to go higher on his overall reception count. Like I mentioned earlier in regards to Joe Flacco being the check down king, when we go ahead and compare him to someone like Derek Carr, they're pretty much at the same level. Where is this game? Here it is. We have Jerome Ford, 2.5 receptions. I thought about it's either him or David Njoku. I might pivot this overall play. I might go to David Njoku in this circumstance, considering how great of a matchup it is and considering the fact that David Njoku is nearly being targeted 10 times per game over the course of this, last 6 weeks. I think I'll probably pivot to David Njoku. I mean, I really do like them both. I'll probably put together them both within a pick'em slip. I like, Amari Cooper going higher than 49.5 receiving yards, but I'll probably take David Njoku in this circumstance. Again, as of late, David Njoku, nearly 10 targets per game on average. I think it's 56 in the last 6 games that he's been able to garner. On top of it, being able to very easily surpass this number on a consistent basis. I'm anticipating this entire offense for the Cleveland Browns to have themselves a huge uptick of performance, and especially considering the fact that if you go back to yesterday's video in regards to quarterback and tight end rankings, I mentioned in regards to Joe Flacco back in 2022 weeks 1 through 3 with Tyler Conklin. Tyler Conklin was getting himself like 7 catches per game throughout the first 3 weeks there. We know how much Joe Flacco going back in the day to with Dennis Pitta, Ben Watson, all these other tight ends that he's had with the Baltimore Ravens over the years. He's obviously loved to utilize his tight ends, and he'll continue that with David Njoku being a primary part of this offense. All right, that's going to cover for me today. Those are the 5 plays that I'm going to go ahead and put together. Again, I'm going to put them together within a singular slip, but I'm also going to break them up. So like I'll take, Howell with a player like Najee Harris. I'll take Michael Pittman Jr. with David Njoku. I'm going to split them up as well because, I mean, technically you could put the insurance on it. If 5 of the 5 hit, you get $100 on your $10 bet. So you pretty much 10x it. If 4 of the 5 hit, you get, 2.5x your overall play. So either way, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to trust the process here. I'm going to play them all. No insurance on it. But again, I'll separate them and play them all individually. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate it. Be sure to click the like button. Subscribe if you haven't yet already. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon for a live stream, Sunday morning for another live stream. Until next time, thank you, everybody, and I'll see you guys. Peace.